When you see astrology being used now as a coaching tool below the surface, right, appropriately for the podcast, it's usually when people understand that your sun sign is just one component, and the next most important thing you want to look at is the composite of your big three, which is your sun, your rising, and your moon. We direct our life, that we calibrate our compass. So in my case, I'm a Scorpio sun, but I'm a Leo rising. So my life is directed by the ability to teach and live by example in spaces where I am visible. That is how I deliver my medicine. That is how I deliver my gifts, because that is the way I move through the world. So what can your moon sign teach you from an archetypal perspective on how to ground? And if your moon sign description resonates with you, then you take those descriptors and you incorporate those into your routine.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Leading Below the Surface podcast. I'm your host, LaTonya Wilkins. It's been a few weeks since we've had a new episode because I've been doing a lot of planning and connecting with folks. It's been a really amazing few weeks at getting two new cohorts of Coaching Below the Surface off the ground. We have 2 new pods. And so that's been very, very exciting. Also really thrilled to take a break and meet up with Erin Corine Johnson. Some of you may remember her. I interviewed her in the earlier days of my podcast. We talked about reparations, and it's a great conversation. So if you want to learn anything about reparations, go back. We'll put the link to that episode in the show notes. It's going to be audio only, but definitely something to listen to, especially with some of the news coming out, especially around the UN, talking a little bit about that. But today with Erin, we're going to talk about something entirely different. Since then, Erin's evolved quite a bit. So today we're going to talk about astrology, identity, growth below the surface, all of these things. Astrology is a big area where Erin and I connect on. Some of you know about my connection with astrology. I don't think I talk about it enough. I try to bring it into my coaching somewhat, but again, everyone is not as accepting of it yet. So I haven't brought it in entirely, but we're going to talk about that today and explore that among other topics today, because there are a lot of folks that are kind of turning to astrology in these times to kind of explain their career path, explain their growth, be able to articulate what they want next. So a little bit about Erin. So Erin and I met on LinkedIn, and it was like 4 years ago or so that she introduced herself to me. She's from Chicago, so we have that in common. I didn't grow up in Chicago, but I'm pretty much a Chicagoan at this point, even though a lot of Chicagoans would argue with that, and they wouldn't agree because there's this whole thing. But if you're from Chicago, you know. So you could drop a note in the comment around if I'm a Chicagoan or not officially. I'm a Bears fan, so that makes me a Chicagoan because they're just now good. And it's been many years that I've suffered being a Bears fan, and I'm finally getting that payoff. Erin and I also worked together. So when I went through a big life transition, which was my divorce, I'm just going to be honest. I actually had a therapist, and the therapist, that was like the last therapist I had. And that therapist was going on maternity leave. And I was like, okay, I think this is a good time for some life coaching. I'd never had a life coach. And Erin has a whole theory around me calling her a life coach. But all coaching's life coaching, right, Erin? And so if you're watching us on YouTube, you'll see her smiling and talking. And so I'm really, really excited to get into this conversation. So this conversation will be for you if you want to learn a little bit more about astrology, a little bit more about growth below the surface, or just around identity and how identity can evolve and why it's so important in leadership and coaching. So Erin, tell us, what did I miss?
Yeah, that was such a great and comprehensive introduction. And I just want to say, for all the salty Chicagoans that are going to roll up on this comment section, is that if LaTonya is not a Chicagoan by this point, by that same rule, I would not be a Chicagoan being 14 years out of Chicago. And let me tell you something. You're not going to tell the granddaughter of the Great Migration, where every single one of my grandparents was born below the Mason-Dixon line and migrated up to build their lives and have generation upon generation of children in Chicago and build our lives there, that I'm not Chicagoan just because I don't live there anymore, right? So I would say, as somebody who is like Chicago in my blood, in and out all the time, like I would say you are absolutely a Chicagoan by my book. So girl, you a Chicagoan, okay? For a plethora of reasons. But I think, yeah, the only thing that I would add to all of this is that so much of who I am today is because of two things. Number one, I moved to Barcelona, or I moved to Spain 14 years ago in this coming August. So 13 and a half years ago, I moved to Spain. And that was a decision that came from a spark from my childhood of starting to teach myself Spanish when I was very young, around age 4 or 5. I just got the bug and I was like, that feels like someplace I want to go one day. Like the language felt like another dimension that I wanted to visit. I remember thinking about it that way. And language became one of my first special interests as a multiply neurodivergent person. That was the first thing that I was so obsessed with that I just wanted to hear it all the time. I wanted to speak it all the time, etc. So long story short, that led me later in my life to finally go to a Spanish speaking country. And because I did it a little later, I guess I had built up that urge to go, that by the time I got here, I didn't want to leave. And so every year until about my 5th year, I found a way to stay, until finally I made my first semi-long-term plan, which was to get my permanent residency, which I got in my 8th year. So that's a big thing. A whole journey was catalyzed by me moving to another country by myself at age 24. That was huge. And I'm now 38. The second thing is, I tell people I have become who I am one conversation at a time. And what happens when you leave your country of birth, or even your city of birth, your state of birth, as you would understand, LaTonya, is that, you start having conversations with people whose entire vantage point is different. Their reference is different. Their core values may vary. They might be very different. They might be closer to yours, but the path they've taken to understand the world the way that they do is very different. So it's like taking alternate paths to get to a similar place. So when you move abroad, already moving to another city, you have a different way of experiencing similar things to where you're from, depending on how far away you go from home. But for me, moving to another country, operating even in another dialect of Spanish from the one that I learned growing up, all of that it just changed my world, and it catalyzed my own self-development. Like, I'm going through versions of myself much faster than the average person, because with every new group of people, you have to dig deeper to a different part of you, or you have to go find pieces of you that you didn't even know were missing in order to interact or to fit in, quote unquote, or just to experience belonging, which fitting in and experiencing belonging, you'll learn from me, I think are two entirely different things. And it has to do with the way we see ourselves and our identities. So those are the only two things that I would add to what you said, because you really did tell my whole story. And also, I'm a professional musician by pedigree. So a lot of people don't know that about me, that all of my degrees are in classical. Well, first is in classical music. Then I have a master's in contemporary studio performance, which is what I did in Spain. And being a performer, being a musician, being an artist is something that also really, really does impact the way that I see the world in the very abstract romantic way. I do see the world as full of potential, and that there is creation, there's beauty everywhere, but also in the way that we as artists express ourselves. Sometimes I do feel it's something that people that are not artists feel that they don't have permission or space, or not in the right place and time to live out all gradients of themselves and to be all 360 degrees of themselves at all times. But I think artists, we have a certain, F this attitude about some things, because it's like, I have nothing else to lose. I might as well just be myself. So those were the only layers I would add to who I am.
You have so many different layers, as you said. And, you have the artist, you have the language, you have the coach, you have the identity, and you have all this, you just have the community thing as well. Like, all these pieces of you come together. And that's one of the reasons why I actually chose you as my life coach, because I was like, wow, she's got all these different things coming in. And, all my coaches had been more business oriented. And I was like, I think I want something a little different. And so let's get into this. The reason why I'm sharing that, well, first of all, I would highly recommend Erin if you're looking for someone. But also, one of the biggest and most pleasant surprises when we started working together was the way that you grounded our work. And there were two fundamental ways that you grounded our work. One was in astrology. And so I want to get into that first. And the second was in what you call decolonizing coaching. And we'll come back to that later, folks, for the second one. So let's start with the first one. So let's start with astrology. And so folks, I think some of you know that I'm pretty connected with astrology. I know my signs, I know my chart. I think when I was working with Erin, I started learning that how aligned everything in my life was with the universe, what was happening in the universe, extremely aligned. Like even this morning, I went back to my year, and it's all extremely accurate. I've used astrology a lot. Like I don't use it for predictions, I guess, but I use it for motivations. Like I should do something on this date, or this is a good time to create, or this period will be a period of change. How can I get ahead of that? Or this is going to be a period where I'm going to be really strong and productive. So how do I do that? So Erin, maybe comment a little bit about your experience with astrology and how you're seeing it used in coaching.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I want to also add, first of all, thank you so much for the glowing testimonial of our time together, because what I think is really important to name is that LaTonya seeking that part of me was a huge part in catalyzing me out of the broom closet. Like a huge part of the work that I've always done on myself has always come back around to some sort of more kind of esoteric, like intangible center, right? This center that I could never really fully identify with words. Like I couldn't explain why I always came back to this place with no bounds where I could experience things from an extrasensory capacity rather than it have to exist in the real world in order for it to be real and true. Because so many of the things that did exist in my real world from the outside looked maybe like, oh, great, you have a loving family, you have a loving home, you have this great, this, that, and the other. But on the inside, I was struggling with a lot of things, or relationally in different branches of my family, I was experiencing a lot of things. And so a lot of times I was able to source clarity, or to at least context for some of what I was experiencing, was around understanding, starting with what most people start with in astrology, or if you like astrology, but can't speak to much outside of your sun sign, which is based on the day you were born. That's where a lot of people start. The thing is, when you go deeper, you know that your sun is just one part of your astrological chart, no matter what school of astrology you're talking about. Personally, I part from a lens of tropical zodiac, right? So tropical astrology, which is based on our seasons in the west hemisphere of the world. Okay, so super important to also say that most references that we're going to be making here today are based on tropical zodiac, okay, and usually traditional Hellenistic astrology. So essentially, for me, the way I see people starting to expand, first of all, is even if you're at that surface level understanding of just your sun sign, what does that represent? I want to start out by saying your sun sign is actually not really your personality. A lot of people think that it's not your personality as much as it is the reference point for your identity. Okay. And there's a really thin line between identity and personality. But let's say personality is a way that we either embody or reject outright parts of our identity, right? So you can think and feel and believe one thing, but be acting out in the world totally differently. So think of your sun sign as the grounding of the foundation of your core values, how you really shine. Like when, that idea of that resonates with me so deeply, think that your sun sign tells a lot about what values, what ideas, what ideals as well are going to ground your identity, right? Are about when you shine the most, when you speak about these things, when you operate in these certain situations. So that's one thing. So on the surface, I see people using that as an entry level part of conversation, of getting to know someone. It's like, hey, where were you born? Like, or how long have you been living in Chicago? Your sun sign can act as that surface level. Hey, what's your birthday? Like, or what year were you born? Things like that. And it's less about, like I said, telling the whole picture of who you are, but giving kind of the coordinates of the soil from which you sprouted, from which you were born, right? It's kind of like that. Think of your sun sign, that's the soil, right? when you see astrology being used now as a coaching tool below the surface, right, appropriately for the podcast, it's usually when people understand that your sun sign is just one component, and the next most important thing you want to look at is the composite of your big three, which is your sun, your rising, and your moon. Of course, that's the relationship we have to the most important celestial bodies close to us, right? The moon, which is our satellite, belongs to the earth. It orbits around the earth as the earth orbits around the sun being referentially from the earth, what constellation was there where the sun, where we are relative to the sun. So your sun sign is that, your moon is the same thing. Where was the moon when you were born? And the rising is what was on the horizon when you were born. Okay. So think about that beautiful relationship, the sun and the moon, the beautiful dance that they do all day, all year, et cetera, et cetera. Then the relationship of the sun to the horizon, right? Like the sun comes above the horizon. They say the night is the darkest before dawn. That relationship of light and dark. So your rising being how we motivate ourselves to live life. And many traditional astrologers believe in our rising as what orients our life. It is the fastest moving coordinate in our entire chart. Your rising sign comes back every single day, right? So this being one of the most important ways that we direct our life, that we calibrate our compass. So in my case, I'm a Scorpio sun, but I'm a Leo rising. So my life is directed by the ability to teach and give people and live by example in spaces where I am visible. That is how I deliver my medicine. That is how I deliver my gifts, because that is the way I move through the world, invisibility, right? And taking that truth with me as I move through the world, right? And so you'll see a lot of coaches that are well-versed in astrology and a lot of astrologers. Then you add the moon. The moon is what governs our emotions in our body, the way that we ground, the way that we regulate. So when we think about that, it's really about how do these three, even if we take all the astrology language out of it, how do these show up in our day-to-day? Well, we're constantly either in contact with or ignoring signs from our body. So what can your moon sign teach you from an archetypal perspective on how to ground? And if your moon sign description resonates with you, then you take those descriptors and you incorporate those into your routine. You incorporate those practices, you incorporate what it says about, in my case, a Capricorn moon. How do we regulate? Making lists, and it is true for me. Maybe not every Capricorn moon sees it that way, but for me, it is true. So I would take that tool. So a coach might take that particular archetype. If that aligns, then we would build a tool based on how a Capricorn moon is said to regulate and best show up in the rest of their lives, right? And so there's a unique relationship between just your big three, your sun, your moon, and your rising. So just on the surface, working with those three signs, you have tools that you can help somebody completely rewrite the rhythm of their day-to-day life just by knowing how those three archetypes show up in your day-to-day. And if you have more than one sign, more than one of those placements in the same sign, then that's reinforcement in a particular trait or a particular characteristic or archetype of a sign. And we would use that more as scaffolding, not as universal truth, right? But as scaffolding. Is this showing up in your life right now? Is this thing we just read about your rising sign in this season true for you? Is it? Great. So if it is, let's work with it. If it's not, let's move on to the next aspect and see where we might find some clues to show up, to use for you to show up different in your day to day. That's a little overview of a couple ways that you can use astrology.
There are a couple things that you said. So one was that you talked about the sun being the soil. And it's funny because, a lot of things come out of the soil, right? Like the soil is one piece of the ecosystem. And people would always say, oh my God, you're a Virgo. My rising is Pisces, which is water, completely different. And then my moon is Leo. So I'm like, oh, okay. Like, I built my business pretty much with a lot of Leo and Virgo energy. So I was always like, I didn't really fit into this Virgo all the time. Like there are some things that are great, but then sometimes turning that off. But you're talking about the soil. And then I think when you said the rising, it's like the horizon, right? Like what's kind of all around you. And then the moon, how would you describe that metaphorically?
Yeah, the moon, metaphorically speaking, is our it's our nervous system. It's a physical manifestation of our nervous system, how we regulate, how we connect to our body, how we express our emotions. So you may remember in our coaching when we started, which with almost anybody, I start with the 4 pillars of being. When I'm at the level that LaTonya is at, like at this point, there's nothing about leadership that I can teach you that you don't already know. So I might as well just help you remember to drink your water and probably not to like sign a contract today, right?
Which is very valuable. Let me just tell you folks, I want to make sure people know how valuable that is. Because I think a lot of times, like even with my pods, Coach Below Surface community, people, they think what's valuable is the leadership, is the capitalism, but it's shifting. And we're going to get into that.
Well, at the end of the day, leadership, just to comment on this real quickly, leadership is very abstract. I find myself in as many years as I have been working either as a leader in someone else's organization or as the right or left-hand woman to a high performing, high achieving leader. Leadership is both abstract and concrete at the same time, because it's abstract because what is leadership? Leadership is just being convincing enough to get people to follow you down a dark alley. Like, and I don't mean that in the sense that in some sinister way, but in a place that's unknown or in a place that's difficult to navigate. Like, what is it that makes people trust that you can lead them in that direction? How are you embodying the way you process difficult situations, difficult emotions, navigate change? All of that is very important in a leader, but also like just individually speaking, every leader has a different kind of coagulation of qualities that makes them a good leader in a particular context. And there are some concrete skills that leaders need to obviously be well versed in: communication, delegation, leading by example, open-ended questioning, empowerment, right? Not micromanaging and all these other things. But all of those are end results. They're filtered through you and your personality and your best skills and your way of interacting with people, right? If it were leadership with one concrete thing, we'd all be extroverts, we'd all be Leos, we'd all be what, you know what I'm saying? Like if that were the case, but you can find brilliant leaders at every edge of every astrological chart, of every personality type, of every, they exist. That's what it is. You may or may not love being in that position, but that doesn't make you not great at it, right? So back to what you were asking. So for the moon, for example, even just in this, we would need a whole different conversation to talk about, like, based on where the moon was when you were born, how does that impact your circadian rhythm, and learning how not to fight that and instead flow with that. That's a whole thing. So when you think about just the moon sign as something to give you clues as to how to regulate, think metaphorically about the work you do in the dark. The work you do in isolation, which is recovery. What happens when we sleep at night? Our body is silently repairing cells, silently putting things back in its place. Even sometimes a virus is taking root and you wake up sick. Like, all of those things happen in the dark. The moon represents deep darkness for us. And then when we get into moon cycles, each part of every moon phase has a different impact on us as well. So when that happens, you think about, okay, so if I'm a Capricorn moon and I'm thinking about the way that Capricorn moons, we are extremely analytical, but always taking our time to make a concrete decision, right? We're not laid back and just like, oh yeah, whatever is whatever. It's like, no, I need every data point before I make a decision about which way I'm going. And it's like, for me, I see that show up in when I think I'm sick. It's funny, I think I'm sick all the time because hypochondria. But then when I know I'm sick, it takes me forever to decide what to do about it, right? And so for me, what does that mean for me as a Capricorn moon? It means that finding the shortest distance to action, like the shortest path to catalyzing myself in a direction. Even if it's not the absolute right direction, I should probably still go to the doctor, right? So for me, the more you know about your moon sign, the more you can take the light with the shadow of that particular archetype, the light of Capricorn being process oriented, amazing at starting new routines and new rituals, but not so good at snap decisions, even when you know that's the right decision. So finding out, how do I balance this absolute resistance to impulsivity, even when I know I need to make a quick decision? Well, it's probably thinking about how I can make this into part of either a routine that helps me maintain my health long-term, or being like, okay, how can I sketch out all the steps I need to take to make this snap decision faster? So instead of bucking my need to have a process or steps or be prepared to do something. It's saying, how can I shorten the path to readiness so that I can make not necessarily more impulse decisions, but be able to make decisions faster because I've streamlined that process that me as a Capricorn moon needs to go through to feel ready to do something that I haven't planned to do. Does that make sense? So it's like not trying to change those inclinations or change those processes, but to compromise with them. The dance is compromise.
Yeah. And so folks, we'll definitely, if you don't know your big three, I guess, I don't know what we call those. We'll leave a link in the show notes so you can do a quick chart. There's a couple places that I think we'd recommend. So we'll leave those for you, but let's keep talking about this in professional development because and then you mentioned moon cycles, but professional development, I love what you were talking about your moon and how you make decisions. And so, again, I didn't know my big three before. And when I found myself in the workplace and actually even with my coaching below the surface community, we talk about our discs sometimes, or we talk about some of the assessments we've done and how they've evolved over time. And I think about being in corporate, I realize that, all I knew was Virgo. So I think I was kind of Virgoing. Virgos, you understand what that means, right? And I wasn't really happy. But then I found that the things that I really loved were the things that were more aligned with my moon, with my Leo, like my heart, or my rising, like being intuitive, being able to connect well as a water sign, right? And the Pisces, oh my gosh, when I found that out, wow, so much more made sense. I mean, the Leo is like, wow, that's why you wear your heart on your sleeve. That's why you're able to go below the surface.
I remember that realization as we talked through the first couple sessions of you figuring out how Pisces shows up and how Pisces kind of not dims or snuffs out Leo, because obviously elemental relationships is one of those like beginner, intermediate entry points for people learning more about astrology, like the different building blocks of astrology and why it's actually more mathematical than it is in a lot of ways. But this is so interesting that you say this because you see yourself as Virgo until you learn there's more to the story. And once you dig into those other components of the story, you're like, oh, it's clarity, but it's also clues. There are clues as to when I feel I'm really deep in this particular archetype, say it's a Virgo trait or a Leo reaction, right? Because your moon is Leo. So a lot of the way that you problem solve in the moment is going to be related to Leo, or the way you can be regulated or co-regulating with someone is going to usually be filtered through a lens of Leo capacity, which is about, again, visibility, being present, being authoritative in a good or bad way, depending on the situation.
Yeah, it's funny because one of my bosses once was like, and this is before I knew my big three, she's like, I told her when my birthday was, and she's like, oh my God, I would have thought you were a Leo. And I'm like, really? And she's like, yeah. And like, I've been told that a lot. Like, and again, I think it's like sometimes things show up at different times. And so like through you, I also learned, oh, this is a good time to really step into my Leo. This is a good time to step into my Pisces. Like especially relationships, like in business development, that Pisces, my gosh, that comes in handy. The Virgo keeps me organized. But the Leo and the Pisces, oh my gosh, the Pisces is like, let's let it flow, let it flow. But there's one thing that you did that I think is really accessible. Cause some of you folks that are listening, some of you are probably pretty advanced. Maybe you know your big three. Some of you probably know your whole chart. I'm thinking most of you are probably maybe just sun sign, maybe the big three, but that's probably as high as it goes. So one of the things that you helped me with, Erin, that I think is extremely accessible, and maybe we could talk about today, are moon cycles. So like, and now every month it's like, I actually ended up downloading a moon app, and like when there's a new moon, I do new, I always make sure that I have a new, like a reset. And so maybe talk a little bit about like a full moon cycle, what that's like. And cause I think that's a really accessible, easy way to get started.
So lunar cycles are really fascinating because it's such a beautiful connection between what we can see and observe, what we can physically see is happening, right? And what we can, as AFAB people or people that are assigned female as at birth, also cisgender women, because all of us were AFAB, we're assigned female at birth. It's interesting how first of all, it's important to know that we as people with ovaries and uteruses evolved synchronized with the moon. It didn't happen the other way around, right? Like we don't say, oh, the cycle is like 28 days because the moon. Yeah, no, the opposite. Literally the average for cisgender women and people assigned female at birth is 28 days because that is one of the evolutionary connections that there is between the cosmos and us here on Earth. We know that the moon phases affect wildlife. We know that certain wildlife only procreate in certain seasons and at certain times in the month, and they only give birth in certain seasons and are only fertile in certain seasons, evolved with the moon for similar reasons. So first thing to know is that as AFAB people, as cisgender women, we are connected to the moon cycles, whether your cycle is regular or irregular, whether you're in premenstrual, menstrual, perimenopause, or menopause. We have this biological capacity to resynchronize with the moon. And it's said that we desynchronized from the moon when we started depending on artificial light, which of course makes sense. If you only go outside and do certain things when the moon is full, then obviously that's going to have an impact on your biorhythm. So that's the first connection it's important to make. So as far as working with lunar cycles for anybody of any gender, of any sex, of any socialization, like the moon basically gives us a longer cycle with which we can plant seeds. We plant seeds into dark soil. We plant seeds into empty soil that's nourished, right? We want it to be healthy soil, but ultimately everything starts, all ideas, all existence starts from a place of darkness. Life, wildlife, everything starts from this place of nothing until it is something. And this natural phasing of the moon mimics also, and this is how we use it as coaches, as, astrologers, and as everyone in between, is because this is one of the most consistent cycles, longer than the sun, which is just sun up to sundown, a day-to-day cycle that we can use to plant seeds of intention. So as the moon begins to grow, the waxing phase is at when we are putting in the actual energy, the resources, the nutrients, so that that seed is more likely to sprout, to germinate, okay? For that to most likely bring about the conditions for that seed to become a plant, for it to become a seedling, for it to burst through the soil. Metaphorically, this is us making sure we're partnering with the right people, making sure we're sitting with the right daily routines, that we're reflecting on our progress, that we're asking for feedback, that we're getting ready to launch the thing, right? And then we get to the full moon. The full moon is, boom, this is the moment that it's said that it's best for us to announce things, to launch things, to communicate what we've been working on in those first 2 weeks of the lunar cycle, right? This is the time when we share with the world what we've been doing, because as, the seed is germinating, or in our bodies as AFAB people, as that's the corresponding to our follicular phase, as that egg is maturing, the body's preparing for a possible pregnancy, right? For possibly bringing something to life. And with that process, month in, month out, is the storing of energy, is the moving of nutrients and resources to possibly support that new amazing thing that is going to be born in this womb, literally and figuratively. So we get to the full moon. This is the highest energy. We've stored up this energy for 2 weeks. Now it's boom, out in the world. We have the difficult conversations. We launch the book. We announce the new project, whatever it is. And then it's our job as the moon wanes for us to finish it, right? To get the job done, right? It's our job to take that energy we've been stored up. You know how you get to the end of a race and you start to feel yourself getting tired. You're like, oh, I don't know if I want to make it. AFAB people know, what does this correspond to? Our luteal phase. You're tired, you're bloated, you might be moody, you can't do as much at the gym, you feel like you don't know what to eat, you feel like you're eating too much or too little. Like everything is starting to destabilize, right? Because the potential, what it took for you to put out all this energy, it's like, wow. You're left with, what am I supposed to do now? Well, the answer, as we would say if we were doing astro coaching, would be, okay, see it through. See it through. You're almost there. Clear the soil, pick the fruit, make sure you're in alignment, get whoever it is you need to help you see this through, right? And once you get back to the new moon, boom, new cycle. You evaluate, you reflect, you take what it is that you've learned in this 28-ish day cycle, and you either take it into the next moon phase or you end it and start something new. So this is one of the ways that we mark time. We mark time using the moon. And for you individually to structure your life around this cycle, it's one of the most illuminating things you can do because it's so consistent, and therefore it helps you be more consistent with the way you make your plans, set your intentions, and then move through that process of making it real.
Folks, it's really useful. I used it a lot for journaling, just understanding where the moon was and then what I put in my journal or what my goals would be or what my intentions would be based on the moon. And this works for men too, right?
Absolutely. Men, what happens with men and AMAB people is that they don't have necessarily the bioclock component of it, but it almost, in a way, it can be liberating, which means that you can just align yourself energetically to this in a way that your body is not working against, right? Because for me personally, I have a short cycle. So that means every few months, my cycle is completely reversed. So I might be menstruating at the full moon. Now, outside of me and with ideas that I have and the way the world is kind of, rotating on this particular cycle, I might be launching something because I know it's a great time in the world to launch something, but physically I'm drained, So knowing that, as an AFAB people, the person, I can maybe decide to forego doing a big launch or energy release at one full moon or the other based on where I am in my cycle. But other times it syncs up exactly, and I get that extra power both from the inside out. For AMAB people and cisgender men, you have to make the choice, and the advantage of just making that choice means that you don't have biological disruptions that might make it feel counterintuitive for you to be launching something at the full moon if you're menstruating, because if you're a cisgender man, you're probably not menstruating, right? So it's really not probably, you're not, right? So the idea is that, yes, men have the advantage of being able to just sync with it by choice, just as women, we have the biological advantage to, when it does align with our menstrual cycle, we have the double push, not just the fortitude because we've decided to launch something at a full moon or decided to pull back and rest at the new moon, but our bodies are giving us extra power or extra reason to sync with that as well. So pros and cons to both, but men can absolutely orient their lives. And they say that if you think about the binary of masculine and feminine energies, which I don't love, I think it's very reductive. And also it doesn't take into account, multi-spirit people, non-binary people, non-gender conforming people. But if you just think about it, as if we say a man is, in his masculine energy, many times we talk about that really cyclical, just like that momentum that we build up of just doing and doing and doing. And it's not just men. We all carry all of these energies, right? So stretching out this cycle and using lunar cycles to regulate and to plan and to feel things on a longer cycle, it's one of those things that a lot of people help folks that embody what's said to be, like I say air quotes, masculine energy. Thinking in a longer cycle is an instant counterbalance to that idea of just go without feeling enough, without being present enough with your body, and vice versa. If we're balancing someone who embodies quote unquote feminine energy of being more flexible, being more emotionally expansive, well, the day-to-day cycle might help catalyze that energy on a day-to-day basis and interact on the basis of that, rather than feel like I'm just a woman, so I have to sink to the moon, or I'm a man, I have to just sink to the sun. No, we are so much more complex than that. And what astrology does, especially when we talk about the way the moon cycles show up and the solar cycles show up, is they give us more tools to counterbalance whatever we feel we don't embody as well. So if we don't work with day cycles as well, how do we use that solar energy and whatever astrological aspect helps us govern that, which is normally our sun and definitely our rising, and vice versa. If I feel that I am really great with long cycles, but the day-to-day challenges me, then I would want to look at, okay, so how can I channel a different type of energy to bring myself into a more productive cycle if that's what I need in this season of my life?
I could talk to you all day. I know I think we're going to need to wrap up here in a minute, but I promised everybody that we'd talk a little bit about decolonizing coaching. So let's just take maybe a second to talk about that. So everybody think about what you think about when I say decolonizing coaching, because for me, I sometimes I don't love that word because I think it's overused. And I think it's it's really abstract. It's like using the word oligarch. Like, I'm like, I don't really know what that means. Like, it's like a brain word. It's not a body word. So I'm like, I don't really know what that means. I don't know what how that affects me. So, but when Erin and I were talking about it, and what I've experienced with Erin in that is that you're with decolonizing coaching or leadership, no one's ever too much. And it doesn't mean that you give up all your time and they come in and they talk your ear off and they steal all your time. It doesn't mean any of that. What it means is that, and Erin, you kind of taught me this as a coach. It means that leave a voice memo, send me a note. I'll always get back to you. And I'm never judging. And that was really helpful because it's like, there are so many things, especially right now in the world we live in, that sometimes you have to process it out loud. And in so many coaching relationships, you do feel like, or I have felt like, and I hope my clients don't feel this way, but I do feel like I have to hurry up or I can't bring that. And I do offer unlimited text and voice memos with some of my clients, but maybe talk a little bit more about that. And like this, I know astrology is probably decolonizing coaching, but maybe talk a little bit about what that means to really show up for coaching now. And we can kind of end on this point.
Yeah, this is a really great question. And I'm just going to start this out by saying anytime I had the word decolonize or decolonization in a subject line or a topic for a corporate session or like any sort of session that was in the context of a company and not an individual, I would always have a significant dip in attendance because most people do not know how to sit with that word without feeling personally attacked. And that is a completely, obviously that's by design, but also it's because most people, if they know what it means, they feel attacked because they feel like they must be being complacent in some way, or even at worst complicit, right? Like that they are, oh my gosh, I'm aiding and abetting the furthering of colonial systems and how they oppress and subjugate, et cetera, et cetera. And other people, they just don't know what it means and they know it's a heavy term, so they just try to avoid it.
Can I ask you just also, and you can describe it how you want, what does it mean? And can people name that in other ways? I know lots of people that do that, but they might not call it that because they might lose their client.
I agree. I think it can bring people that understand the definition closer, but I am more comfortable and I feel more effective embodying decolonization than I am describing it because it is such it creates a visceral reaction. But decolonizing coaching, I think, looks like understanding that no one person holds the key. That's the first thing. No one person holds the key or the answer. Every single thing you have ever learned in your life was somebody's original thought at some point, right? And there's a big difference between original thought and original idea. An original thought is you, through your life experiences, coming to a conclusion. An original idea is a conglomerate of ideas, original or borrowed or stolen, that now have been packaged up in such a way that is more or less unrecognizable to those for whom those were their original thoughts and ideas. That's colonization, right? It is going somewhere and deciding this is mine now and changing it just to the point of non-recognition, that either the originators of the idea or concept can no longer recognize it, or that based on the criteria that the colonizer has set, they are no longer eligible or no longer worthy of accessing it. Right. So decolonizing coaching is understanding that coaching is literally just a glorified conversation, right? Going back to what I said in the beginning, that I've become who I am one conversation at a time, which means naturally I have gotten most of my clients through a conversation. I've gotten most of my collaborations and sponsorships and all of these things through varying degrees of conversation. So decolonizing coaching first is accepting that you can be an incredible coach and never use the same talking point, tool, strategy, or open-ended question that another coach has used. That's the first thing. The second of all, that we all might use a different book or a different divination practice in the case of more spiritually aligned coaching or astro coaching or identity and belonging coaching in my case, which is my specific coaching area, like my trademarked title and essentially my kind of own conglomerate of original and borrowed thoughts and ideas. So decolonizing coaching for me is looking at the individual, understanding their experience, understanding their context, and simply delivering what they need in order to build bridges from one version of themselves to the next. Okay. So if the people that I work with tend to have like be someone like you, LaTonya. Quite honestly, I always say like, give me 20 LaTonyas and I'm good, right? But it's like it's this juxtaposition between success, between being a good person, between being a complex and nuanced and just the type of person that people want to be in your presence and people want to learn from you. It gets to the point where it doesn't matter what you do. If you have the right conversation with somebody, as soon as you tell them what you do professionally, they're going to find a way to need you. Okay? They're going to find a way to afford you, quote unquote, because capitalism's in the way. So we have to pay for things, right? So for me, it's understanding that once my needs are met as a human behind the coaching title, why wouldn't I want to show up for you whenever you send me a message? Why wouldn't I want to answer your question if I'm awake and I see it come in, or it's, within the time bounds in which I operate? Why does it matter how many times? Why would I be ticking off or tallying the hours if I already have what I need and if I, in that moment, have what you need? The only thing that would ever motivate someone to gatekeep that type of care is capitalism and greed. So if your needs are met, I have no reason to gatekeep my time. If you have paid my price, why in the world would I put time bounds around unless it's actually disrupting my life? My boundary is that these are the hours in which I work. My limitations are that I sincerely might not see that text if you send it outside of that. And my expectation is that you try your very best to only text me in those hours, knowing, or that if you text me in those hours, that you remember that I cannot respond until the next time I'm available. But that does not mean that I want you to not give me that in that moment, because you might be walking down the street and that's when you have that realization. I'm not going to be scandalized by the fact that you sent me that message, or vice versa. Like, not even just that you sent me, that you would have the audacity to ask for time outside of time. No, you've already contributed to me as a human, fulfilling my needs, my human needs of feeding my family, of, growing my business, and of doing more good for other people. You've paid my price so I can not only serve my community at low and no cost. Like, I charge, my clients pay me because they also know that part of what they pay is designated to do things for people at varying access points. So once my needs are met, what need do I have to gatekeep you or to police what you need in order to access the transformation that I've promised you?
Right.
So it's my responsibility to price accordingly. It's my responsibility to communicate to create my boundaries, communicate my boundaries, to set expectations, to establish my limitations or understand my limitations, and therefore communicate my expectations. Those are my things, right? So once that is met, those needs are met. This is a decolonization talk point. It's that decolonization dictates that my role in the village is this because I've decided it is. Therefore, as long as my needs are met, I'm able to deliver at this capacity. Decolonization is simply taking the rules and the unnecessary rules and bounds off of human connection and care. At the end of the day, in most societies, pre-capitalism as we know it now, existed on the basis of everybody in this village has something that's vital to someone else's survival. And none of us is an exception. So how do we structure the delivery of that and the receipt of that from other people in a way that makes sure that everyone's needs are met, that everyone's sovereignty is respected, and that everyone's potential is nourished and fed and catalyzed, right? Which part of that is knowing where you fit in that community paradigm, right? Because money always existed in some capacity. There's always been an exchange, but the exchange is usually energy related. So once you have given me the money that I request in order to be able to hold that space for you, why would I put additional bounds on that space I hold? Unless I physically am not there. Unless I physically cannot, unless I physically, you know what I'm saying? And of course, there's always nuance. Everybody will determine for themselves what is and what it means to abuse those limits or to overstep those boundaries. But ultimately, decolonization is about removing the rules from community and remembering that exchange looks like a lot of things. And as two people who have many different layers of exchange in terms of fellowship, I mean, what LaTonya is not saying is that we started as coaches, then we became coach cousins, and then we became cousins, because that's family. That's like what happens. And it's because there's this exchange, there's this mentorship. I tell people all the time, and I'm going to embarrass her right now, LaTonya is the coach I want to be when I grow up. So imagine when someone like that asks you to be such an important part of their becoming or their moving from one phase to another. And it reinforces the concept that everybody knows something that's vital to someone else's survival. I am no exception. LaTonya is no exception. No one listening to this is any exception. And when you build community outside of the bounds of colonial iterations of capitalism, you remember that money is simply the vehicle for you to be free to deliver that gift in whatever medium makes sense for you, in whatever language you speak, and on whatever terms you decide, right? Money is just so that you can deliver with no bounds, that you can be generous to no end, right? That's all it's for. So once you have what you need or what you desire, the bounds should relax.
Okay, so folks, we're going to end. So a couple ways. Erin, how can people get a hold of you?
Yeah, so in the next few weeks, my individual coaching brand, separate from my company, Ola Magnolia, will launch on its own website in its own space, and that's identitybelongingcoach.com. So you can save that now. It's not live on the internet, but by the time you hear this, it probably will be. So identitybelongingcoach.com, which is part of my company, olamagnolia.com. You'll always be able to find me on there for sure. And I am also starting my YouTube channel, so I'm super excited to take everybody on the journey of not just talking the talk, but walking the walk. I tell people all the time, I can show you better than I can tell you what it's like to build the type of, full circle 360-degree version of myself, and the conversations and transformations I've been able to facilitate as a result. That's at Identity Belonging Coach on YouTube. So youtube.com/Identity Belonging Coach. You'll find me there. Same on Instagram, Identity Belonging Coach on Instagram. So, and on LinkedIn. I'm Coach Erin Corine. So they're all connected.
We'll put that all in the show notes, folks. And stay tuned. We'll have some more episodes, and we'll also provide you with some updates on what's going on with Change Coaches. And thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.